Hey friends, this is Scott. Before we start, I want to point out that this podcast, this episode, was recorded before some very unfortunate layoffs at Mozilla. And I want you to make sure that you check out the hashtag Mozilla Lifeboat. And I want you to note that there are 250 lovely and talented people that are looking for work. While some of those folks were in the mixed reality space, this work is more vital than ever. Diane, our guest, does still work for Mozilla, but is deeply pained that a number of her coworkers do not. Please do what you can to support our friends at Mozilla. When you need to focus on building, do you want to get bogged down by your database? MongoDB is an intuitive, flexible document database that lets you get to building. MongoDB's document model is a natural way to represent data, so you can focus on what matters. MongoDB Atlas is the best way to use MongoDB. It's a global cloud database service that gives you all of the developer productivity of MongoDB, plus the added simplicity of a fully managed database service. You can get started free with MongoDB Atlas at mongodb.com/atlas. Hi, this is Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today I'm talking with research engineer Diane Hosfelt from Mozilla. How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm getting there. I'm kind of not appreciating reality right now. It kind of sucks. So I've been actually spending a little bit of time in virtual reality or mixed reality or augmented reality. Maybe you can explain the difference between those three things.
Oh man, I don't think anyone actually has the answer to that. Um, so there are a lot of terms that we throw around, spatial computing, extended
Mm.
reality, mixed reality. But what it really comes down to is a conglomeration of technologies that I guess I would say extended reality is a good umbrella term.
Mm.
And then in augmented reality, what you're doing is you're augmenting what you're seeing with virtual objects. In virtual reality, what you're doing is you're fully immersed in a virtual environment. You aren't seeing the real world. And then in mixed reality, you're kind of in between augmented and virtual reality.
Okay. So if I've got, I remember when I was growing up, the coolest thing that I'd ever seen, the most space age thing was a car that would project the speedometer, out in front of the car. And they had little projectors. That's augmented reality of a sort.
Yeah. So heads-up displays, which is what we
Heads up
call those,
displays. Okay.
those are augmented reality. Pokemon Go is augmented reality.
Okay. And then I've got a Vive Pro, and I recently got an Oculus Quest, the smaller self-contained one. That covers my vision entirely, and I can't even see my nose.
Yes, exactly. So those are virtual reality.
And as I've been doing this myself and spending more time in virtual reality, I've noticed that I've both still a little bit nauseous, but I am building up a bit of a tolerance. Is my brain fighting against me, telling me that this is a bad idea?
So we call that simulator sickness. And basically what we think it is it's the disconnect between what your body thinks should be going on and what your brain is experiencing. Some people are more susceptible to others. I don't particularly study simulator sickness, but when we do research, it's something that we have to be really conscious of. We have to check in with our research participants, our subjects, to make sure that they aren't getting too nauseous. I actually, so I was at a conference one time and I had my Quest on me and I lent it to somebody I met at the conference so that they could experience Beat Saber, which of course, was the breakout VR game. And it turns out that they are really prone to motion sickness and they didn't tell me. And so they played a couple songs on Beat Saber and then they took the headset off and they were completely completely pale and flat
Oh,
out
no.
white and had to put their head between their knees. And I was like, if you were feeling that bad, why didn't you take the headset off?
I'm so sorry. No.
And I felt so bad and I felt so guilty for, for making them so sick. Luckily, they weren't ill or anything, but it does simulator sickness. We don't completely know why it affects people so much more strongly than others, but it is an active area of research, and we know that like certain techniques make you more prone to being ill than others. For example, rotation. If you do a
Hmm.
smooth rotation, that tends to make people more sick than what we call a snap rotation, where you snap rotate 45 degrees.
That's an interesting thing that you bring up because I was doing some research on when films first started, right? When motion pictures began. And people were not initially sure if folks could switch contexts like that. If you have a one speaker facing one direction on one camera and then you cut to another person facing the other direction, there was a belief that that would be a bad idea. But people somehow can do that. Like the brain just goes, oh, new scene, which is interesting because that's not how we work in life. But that's how our shows work. And then that now has become an issue in locomotion when you're walking around in these games. Like I tried playing Doom on a an Oculus, and oh my goodness, I was immediately nauseous. But if I just push a button and teleport, then it's fine. It's like watching a movie, and I don't feel uncomfortable at all.
Yeah, there's a lot of study into locomotion techniques and which of those is the least likely to induce simulator sickness.
Hmm. And that sickness, it's kind of like motion sickness, where you're on a boat and you feel your feet underneath you, and that doesn't line up with what you're seeing in the horizon, and that doesn't line up with what your ears are telling you, and all of those things just may make people feel weird. It sounds like.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And I've experienced it a few times myself, only a few times, and I have no idea why exactly I've experienced it. I experienced it a few times after playing Beat Saber
Hmm.
for no apparent reason.
Wow.
I just, 1 second I was sabering those beats, and the next second I was running off.
Interesting. Well, I had a Vive Pro for a while, and I got a better video card. And I have to say that getting getting set up in virtual reality cost more money than I really wanted to spend, and it kind of turned me off of it. And then I got this Oculus Quest, which was very reasonably priced and doesn't require another computer. It's basically like an appliance, right? Like an iPad or an Android tablet, just a thing that you turn on. It's really made it a lot more accessible, which I think is what the goal is.
Yeah, so that's a huge problem that we have with VR. And even more so with AR, aside from, mobile AR that you just use on your phone, but the immersive augmented reality, those devices are multiple thousands of dollars. So I won't even talk about making those accessible right now. But largely, until the Oculus Quest, a lot of this was really out of reach for your average everyday consumer. And so it really has been a plaything for people who are really dedicated to gaming or for high end like enterprise applications. Like we see it used in flight simulators and military training. Um, but it also has applications in like therapy and stuff. Well, how is your average therapist going to afford all of these? Like, how are your average patients or therapists going to afford all of this equipment, right? Um, and and so it's kind of difficult for, you know, in the tech world, we're very privileged. And I think that sometimes we forget about that. We're like, oh, you know, we can drop $400 on an Oculus Quest. And one of the really disappointing things for me is the loss of the Oculus Go, which
Mm.
was even lower priced than the Oculus Quest, but it was only 3 degrees of freedom. So instead of being able to track head orientation and position, so you could move and look around, you could only look around, and you always had to teleport to move.
Well, hopefully the Quest then moves down market and becomes the new the new Go at the same price point or a similar price point.
Yeah, that would be ideal because, there are applications for a 3DOF headset, especially for, like 360-degree video viewing, which is one of the big applications that we see for the self-contained headsets,
Hmm.
especially in places where you have like smaller living spaces. It's basically a personal theater.
Yeah, I've tried watching Netflix on it, and if you don't have a fancy living room with a fancy couch, they'll make you one, and you're in this amazing high ceiling, perfect kind of place, and you can sit there. And I could imagine being in a small studio somewhere or a micro apartment, and that would be a moment of relaxation. We
Yeah.
just needed to make it as easy to use as a tablet and as accessible and as inexpensive.
The other problem with accessibility that I see is beyond price point. One of the things that Oculus has not done a great job of, in my opinion, is making their headsets accessible to people with, say, different hair types. Um, like, for example, I have to do my hair a particular way to
Hmm.
keep some of the headsets on my head. Otherwise, they just kind of slide off. And it's
Yeah, well,
not
it's
that
got
my
a big
hair is
band. It's got a big band
particularly.
over the top, right? It's a big middle section that it assumes nothing's there.
Yeah, so I have to like give myself pigtails. And sometimes I have to give
Ah.
myself like little pigtails on top of my head to keep it from sliding off because I've got kind of a small head. Like you can make whatever jokes you want to about that. Um, but so the adjustment is fine. But, the other thing is, what about people who have afros or dreads or any other type of non-white hair? How are
Yeah.
they supposed to wear these headsets, and how are they supposed to wear them, comfortably for long
Mhm.
periods of time?
It's funny that you mentioned that because, it's really flat hair. Flat hair is welcome and not flat hair is a challenge. My wife has 7 years of dreadlocks and has found it to be really challenging. And I have to really expand the entire thing. The whole upper carriage of the harness has to be expanded to the maximum size. And then my sons have afros that they like. Do they have to press it down or push it down? So, having basically alternate harnesses or some other way to do it, like you see those videos, the TikToks, where kids come up with a cool way to put their graduation cap on. We need the same thing for virtual reality headsets.
Yeah, pretty much. And I think that that is really, um, it's a shame because, we're excluding a large chunk of the population. And it's a chunk of the population that, one, is pretty systemically excluded by price. And then, two, when they get their device, they find that they're excluded by the design of the device. And I find that to be pretty unethical.
Mm. So, speaking of trying to include everyone, I installed Firefox Reality, and I wanted to be able to browse the web. And I kind of thought, I guess I thought it would be like Ready Player One, and I would be able to take this to my non-technical parent and say, "Look, it's like the internet, except it's a city, and you wander around and you go places." But then I realized that I didn't really understand, like, how would one navigate and how would one go? What does an immersive web look like today, and what should it look like tomorrow?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned navigation because one of the things that the immersive web lacks right now is the concept of a link. We're working on it,
Hmm.
but there are a couple problems here. So, one of the problems is, how do you safely navigate a link in immersive reality? Because what happens is, on an immersive web page, the pixels of the of the screen, so what you're seeing is completely controlled by the web page. It's just like full screen mode. So what happens if you want to navigate from full screen mode? You exit full screen mode and then you navigate in your normal mode, and then if you want to go back into full screen mode, you re-enter full screen mode, right?
Mm.
That's how it happens on the 2D web. So if you take that analog to, let's suppose that we do have links on the 3D immersive web. So we take that analog over. Well, you're in immersive mode. You're surrounded by all the pixels of the web page of the experience that you're in. And then you click on a link. Well, now you have to exit immersive mode, go into 2D mode, and then traverse the link in 2D mode. And then you have to re enter immersive mode. That's not ideal. And in fact, like some headsets might require you to like think of the Google Daydream. In order to exit into 2D mode, you have to take the headset off, right?
Mm.
And literally take the phone out of the holster and go into 2D mode that way. So that is a huge hassle, and it might break some sites. So that doesn't quite work. So we need a way to traverse immersive site to immersive site. So what happens if you're in an immersive website? Again, the website is rendering all the pixels that you see, and you click on a link, and it takes you to another website. Well, you don't have a URL bar. You don't know where you are. You don't know where it's taken you. It can take
Mm.
you anywhere it wants you to.
So you've gone somewhere. You're experiencing a virtual environment. You don't necessarily want something popped over the top of you. You don't want a pervasive heads up display, but you kind of do because you want it to be immersive. But you also need a panic button. You need an ejector seat. But you keep saying mode, and I feel like that's the challenge. I've always had a challenge with the idea of a mode for non-technical people.
Okay, yeah. And so, like, ideally, we want people to be able to stay in this immersive mode so that they can remain immersed, so that they can not have to think about these modes, right? So that they don't have to think about 2D mode. They don't have to think about immersive mode. They can
Right.
just be
I can
immersed.
just be there. Yeah.
But we need a way in order to show them that the browser is rendering some of the pixels that they're seeing. And to be precise, we need a way to show them that the browser is telling them, hey, you're at this location. This link wants to send you to this other location.
Mm-hmm.
So, the current work that I'm working on is prototyping this concept of a trusted immersive UI.
Mm.
And basically, it's a symbol or a way to do either a shared secret or a persistent UI that shows you that when this is activated, the browser is showing you what you're seeing. And so that's my current project. And the main security property that you get out of it is non spoofing, because the websites then would try to spoof this security property,
Mm-hmm.
so that they can then send you to, a phishing site or something.
Right. So the way that my parents always get nailed because someone painted a dialog box that looked close enough to the dialog box they expected.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's exactly what we're trying to prevent.
Hey friends, I want to tell you about one of our sponsors, Text Control. They're not only the creator of the fully featured document editor library for .NET and Angular apps, but their libraries also have powerful PDF functionality. So you don't have to program PDF documents. You can make MS Word templates and then merge them with data, and that'll let you create pixel-perfect PDF and PDF/A documents. The best part is fillable form elements like text boxes and checkbox fields and drop-down elements, and you can add those easily to your PDFs and make filling out forms really simple for your users. And don't forget, TX Text Control gives developers a complete solution to handle PDF documents in any business process. So check it out. You can try it free. See the live demos at textcontrol.com/demos. It's just that easy. textcontrol.com/demos.
So it's a work in progress. We're doing user experiments right now. But, the question is, which comes first, the link or the trusted immersive UI? And for me, the security mechanism has to come first. And then we'll figure out, well, what does a link actually look like on the immersive
Mm-hmm.
web? And then we'll be one step closer to this like Oasis idea.
Right, Oasis from Ready Player One. So that, and also the idea that, are these metaphors going to become as pervasive and as obvious and as baked in as URLs are today?
That's the hope.
Yeah. So you want the metaphor to stick, like you know how they always joke about when you are in something like Microsoft Word, and you click the floppy disk, and no one knows what a floppy disk anymore is, but it doesn't matter. Like, it stopped mattering, right? Because
Yeah.
now it's just a save icon, and it's iconic. It is
Hmm.
an idiomatic metaphor that is, in the zeitgeist of it all. So that, I actually, here's a good example. Tell me what you think about this. I remember when iPads, people said you'll never be able to play first person shooters on iPads because there's no sticks. And we spent all these months and months trying to figure out how the metaphor would work. And then they just made virtual sticks, and everyone was like, "Oh, this is great. It feels right." It sounds like you need to do a lot of user testing to find a metaphor that just clicks. You're not really inventing a metaphor as you are discovering what the human brain wants the metaphor to be.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of this work is discovering, how does the human brain work? How does it process things? What does it
Mm-hmm.
notice? Does it notice these minute differences? Does it notice when things are being spoofed or changed? And things like that.
And how we feel about virtual reality, because when I started exploring this space, I felt like, oh, virtual reality is going to be great. It's just reality, but virtual. So I went into the Oculus Quest and I said, I'm going to go to this concert. And there was like a Metallica concert, which apparently is a band. And I said, I'll go to this Metallica concert. And I go into this room, and it's basically a 3D rendered theater, and I'm watching a movie of a Metallica concert. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess that's kind of not as exciting. I thought I would be in the mosh pit or whatever. But then I turned to my left and my right, and there were other people there. And I found that very intimate and awkward and uncomfortable, that I don't remember. I guess it was the difference of they were in my space as opposed to I went somewhere.
Yeah, so the Stanford Virtual Human Interaction Lab does a lot of studies on like perception and presence and things like that. Um, and one of the things that I think is going on is that that your body is at home,
Mm.
but your presence is like you're present somewhere
My
else.
astral projection.
Yeah, and one of the things that might have actually been happening is that you weren't fully present in this virtual scene,
Yeah,
this
that's fair.
virtual environment, and so you weren't fully immersed. Um, the other thing that has historically been a problem with social VR is that not enough people who know each other, like usually you'd go to a conference with, not a conference, what's it called? A concert. That's what
Yeah,
it is. Usually you'd go to a concert with friends, right? So,
right.
but not enough people who know each other have headsets. Um, and that's been historically a problem with social VR experiences. And that's kind of why we get this problem where you have these massive um, social VR experiences where they just kind of throw a bunch of strangers into a room and expect them to interact. And moreover, they expect them to interact in ways that aren't toxic,
Mm-hmm.
which to
What could
me,
go wrong?
exactly. They're like, oh, if we just paste a code of conduct on this one wall when you enter, everything's gonna be just fine. And shocker, it isn't. That's not how it works. The first thing that people do when they enter social VR is they go up and they smack somebody. And then what happens is the nerve endings where you're avid like because you're embodying an avatar, the nerve endings actually will react in a similar way as if you were actually smacked.
Oh, wow.
It's very strange the way that embodiment affects our physical bodies.
Yeah, I call it the lizard brain. I'm not a researcher and I don't have any experience, but that feeling when what's happening in reality does or doesn't react with the core part of what your brain is, and whether your consciousness agrees or disagrees, and how you react to those different things, whether you feel the hair on your arms goes up or the back of your neck is, all those feelings are cognitive dissonance about what's happening versus what is, you feel is happening.
Yeah. And this is almost the exact opposite. It's the cognitive What's the opposite of dissonance? I don't
Yeah,
know.
that's a good question. I will go and figure that out.
Yeah, it's this like there's this cognitive link between what's happening to your avatar and then what happens to
Harmony.
you. Harmony, smart. It's this cognitive harmony between you and your
Hmm.
avatar.
Right.
Um, so what we actually did at Mozilla, we have a social VR experience. It's called Hubs,
Hmm.
and there are a couple ways that we approached it. One, we were like, you know what? We're not just going to take a bunch of random strangers and toss them in a room together and see what happens. That social experiment hasn't quite worked out. Um, so instead, what we did is we took this approach of someone creates this room, this social virtual room, and then
Hmm.
they share the link out with their friends. Anyone with the link can then visit the room. Now, if you
Hmm.
make the link public, then sure, you might have a bunch of rando strangers. But the idea is you probably don't want that.
Hmm.
So you share it with your friends. And the way we get around your friends maybe not having headsets is that it works in the browser. Mozilla,
Hmm.
at heart, we're a browser company. So it works in the browser, and so you can be in the browser in your headset, or you can be in your browser in um, on your desktop, and it works the same regardless. So you
Mm.
can have this shared multimodal experience where some people are in headsets, some people aren't in headsets. You can all share the same space, and it's really
Yeah.
nice.
It's really quite clever. I mean, the barrier to entry is quite low. You go to hubs.mozilla.com, you say create a room. It asks you for mic permissions, like any other online chat space. And if you can walk around, you can drag it around, like in the browser. So my 12-year-old has like a little room that he goes to with my 14-year-old. It's bizarre because they live in the same house, and then they can hang out in this space while separately in their own rooms. So introverts unite separately in your own personal space.
Yeah, it's great. And the other conscious choice that we made was that you get kind of a preview of the space. You start out when you're
Mm.
doing this permissions work and everything, you
Hmm.
start out in the lobby. And so you can see what's going on in the room. So if you're invited to join this room, and then when you go to join the room, you hear a bunch of like racist or derogatory language happening in the room while you're in the lobby, you're like, you know what? This isn't a room I want to join. You know that before you're immersed in this experience. So you can exit, you can choose to exit before you enter the room.
Mm. And that's so this is almost a practice version of your link idea. Even though I'm on the flat web right now, I'm getting a sense of what I'm about to get into, as opposed to a clean white space that says enter room. And I'm like, okay, here goes nothing.
Exactly. And so we're using the same cautious approach to links on the web, is that
Hmm.
we want to give people a preview insofar as we can
Yeah.
of,
And the other
hey,
thing,
this is where you're going.
yeah, the other thing that I think is clever and subtle is there's motion. It's kinetic. I thought it was a picture of a space I was going to go to, but it's just gently floating, like there's a light wind, and I'm moving within that space, which also gives you a sense of, oh, this is not only where I'm going, but it's going to be cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
It's a great project.
So how do we right now? It seems like this is kind of the nascent early times for the immersive web. What do you think it'll look like in 1, 2, and 5 years?
In 1 year, I think that we'll start to have, I think that we'll start to see browsers deploy what's called WebXR, which is the standard.
Hmm.
Currently, we have browsers that have deployed WebVR, which is the previous standard, which is
Hmm.
superseded by WebXR.
Okay.
So browsers are now replacing WebXR, WebVR with WebXR.
Hmm.
Although some browsers are choosing to keep WebVR because it's a bit of a problem, because you have people who have built static sites using WebVR. like say an architect or someone who's built this site in WebVR for a client, and the client's not paying them anymore.
Yeah.
So they don't have this, they don't want to go back and update it. But the client also doesn't want their site to just stop working. So that's something that we're kind of trying to figure out, when do you deprecate the old standard?
Mm-hmm. But
Um,
WebXR is a working draft, which means this is a thing that is going to be a standard, and then the editor's draft is like nowish, right?
yeah. So it's getting close. It's getting
Mm.
close. I think there are only a few more issues until we reach CR, which means something.
So if it's everywhere and if it's available, and then if Apple comes out with something, everyone's rumored that Apple has something reality related coming out later this year. I think we all cross our fingers and hope that it's not, in fact, uh, ignoring all these standards and doing their own thing.
Yes, definitely. Um, the hope is, I'm trying to think if there are any Apple people that we've worked with in the standard.
But when the web, like the web leads in this kind of a space, right? I mean, this is a standard, and it is a standard to make the world better for everyone.
Yeah, and standards, the thing with the web is there's a much lower barrier to entry. With an application, so say you want to, I don't know, you've got there's this cool application and you want to move your phone around and just put like funny faces on top of your cat. So this application needs to detect your cat and then put a
Right.
funny face on top of your cat. Well,
Mm-hmm.
you don't want to download an app to do that. You're only going to use it once on the day that it's really popular and everyone's doing it. You want
Mm-hmm.
to go to a website and do it. And that's the beauty of the web. Instead of downloading an app and
Yeah.
agreeing to a billion permissions, including like access to your photos and
Yep.
access to your photos in perpetuity,
Well,
and
I'll give you an even better example. Literally today, I'm working on redoing the shelving in my garage. I was really surprised and impressed to see that the shelf that I bought, the Amazon app had an AR thing, and I could see the shelf in the room, and it put it there, and it said, "This is what it'll look like." And I was like, "That's amazing." And I had the exact same thought. But why is this in an app? What about the little companies that don't have an app? Like, I
Mhm.
love mom and pop shop that makes, custom wood sculptures to be able to have that same ability. Wouldn't that be amazing if they could just click a
Pop
button
it on a
in Firefox, and it would just work?
Yeah, you pop it on a website, you visit the website, and it works. And that's the low barrier to entry that the web promises. And I think that that is where the web shines. It's not, my argument is always that we're not talking about the web or native. We're talking about
Mm.
the web and native. They're always going to coexist. There are some things that native is going to be better at, and there are some
Mm-hmm.
things that web is better at. And web is
That's cool.
better at these ephemeral experiences that,
Mm-hmm.
you do once and then, you're just kind of like, you don't want something you're only going to put a shelf there once. You don't need a dedicated shelf putting app.
You're absolutely right. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today, Diane Hosfelt.
Thank you so much. You can find me on Twitter at Avada Kedavra.
All right. And I'll put links to Diane and all the great stuff that she and her friends are working on at Mozilla. I want you to check out mixedreality.mozilla.org and especially hubs.mozilla.com. Super fun. I'll have links in the show notes. This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.